So, okay, yeah. Just say if you can see me or if you guys are having any problems seeing me. Anyone? Yeah. So okay, yep. Everyone can see me fine. So guys, let's go into getting a huge chest, right? So basically, when we talk about the chest overall, we covered 4 different topics, right? We covered the muscle fiber makeup of the chest, and that was the first thing we talked about. And we talked about it being primarily fast twitch. So so basically, we're talking about 60% fast twitch and 40% slow twitch. So when you think about muscle fiber types, you know, what do fast twitch muscle fibers do? Or type 2 fibers, what do they do? We think about them more as more like the heavier loading, the more the explosive type of movements. That's the general way we think about like fast twitch muscle fibers and what they do. So you're talking about like, you know, lifting at least within, you know, probably within a 12 repetition range, anywhere from 1 to 12 reps. Now, don't get me wrong, you can recruit fast twitch fibers with 12 to 15 so long as you're going to fatigue. But again, in general, we're talking about within 1 to 12 reps, heavier loads, probably longer rest periods are going to hit those fast twitch muscle fibers. The slower twitch muscle fibers are going to be more like past 12 repetitions. And so that's kind of important to realize. And it can even be like large sets, like something like super sets, giant sets, you know, where I'm doing like a bench press, and then I'm doing supersetting that with, you know, possibly dumbbell bench, and then flies, you know, and then cable flies. Those are such high repetitions that you're going to end up having to really tap in and hypertrophy a lot of the slow twitch muscle fibers. So, you know, you're going to want to have a wide variety of repetitions to kind of maximize that. Again, probably want to spend maybe like 60% of your time in a 1 to 12 repetition range. If you're bodybuilding, more like 6 to 12 repetition range. And then the rest of the other 40% of the time, probably greater than 12 reps, you know, 12 to 15 reps, maybe some burnouts with 20 reps, etc. The next thing we talked about was the angle of bench press, and basically we talked about, particularly when we talked about like the lower chest and the upper chest. So and when we talk about optimizing angle, Will, what's the optimal angle you would say for optimizing like say the upper chest overall?
We're looking at about a 40-degree angle.
About a 40-degree angle is going to be probably optimal for the upper chest, right? When you start going, especially like past 50 degrees, you know, you're going to have less activation in the upper chest. So you'll rely a lot more on the delts. So, and for lower chest, Will?
For lower chest?
Yeah.
We're talking like
decline.
Causal decline?
Yeah.
We're looking at about -20.
Yeah, so probably like a nice shallow decline.
20 degrees in the
Yeah.
direction.
So right here, decline, you're going to optimize lower pecs. And I think that's important, right? So your decline is going to optimize the lower chest. You're talking about hitting more of like, again, like a 40-degree angle, but anywhere from 30 to 50, you'll optimize upper chest. If you get too steep, you're not going to. I think that's key to understand. So now what we're going to talk about is, what about the width, you know, the width of the bar? You know, there's obviously different angles. You can do like, we talk about close grip, right? Close grip's not going to necessarily be optimal, but when we're talking about for upper chest, or more talking about more like anywhere from shoulder width, is, you know, basically to not more than 1.5 times shoulder width. Because think about it for a second. When you look at the upper chest and you look at the lower chest, right? The upper chest itself has a better moment arm, essentially, or better, it's set up mechanically better for flexion. So we're talking about flexion. The upper chest is better at flexion than the lower chest. So think about it for a second. If I have like my grip kind of like this, and I'm more like shoulder width, I'm getting more flexion of the shoulders than if I have it wide out. I'm not getting as much flexion. So we're talking about when you're doing like bench, if you have like anywhere from like shoulder width to maybe a little bit wider than shoulder width, you're going to have more flexion, and so you're going to activate more of the upper chest. But when you talk about more of a wide grip, which would be considered like greater than 1.5 times shoulder width, that's going to give a better mechanical advantage for this movement, which is adduction. So what you want a better adduction moment arm, that's going to be the lower chest. So basically we're talking about more of a wide grip, not too wide, but maybe 1.5 times shoulder width, maybe a little wider than that, but not too wide. That's going to maximize the lower chest. So just think about that when you're actually doing your bench press or whatever movement that you're doing. The last thing that we talked about in the Muscle PhD Academy this week was, is bench press really the king of all chest movements? One thing I will say is this: we do know, like, as you progressively overload on the bench press, yes, your chest does get bigger. But if you look at muscle activation studies, when they compare machine press, when they compare flies, you see as much activation, like when you're doing like flies, if you do them right, as when you're seeing like a bench press. In the chest itself, it all depends how you're doing them, but if you're doing them right, you do see that activation. So I think that's important. That, what does that tell us? If you're just doing bench, you're going to plateau. It's the law of accommodation. So if you're just doing flat bench, you're going to plateau. It's a law of accommodation. We did a study with Dr. Eduardo de Souza that got published in Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, where when you did a variety of exercises, you got more hypertrophy and you got more regional, like more actually, in different heads of musculature than if you actually just did like one exercise. So even if you like bench press, we recommend varying it up. So that's going to be key. The last thing was like, can push-ups help you build mass? If you're untrained and you can only do 8 push-ups, yeah, they're going to be great. But eventually, you're going to need some progressive overload, right? So if you can do like 100, 200 push-ups, sure, you could build muscle on that. I'm not saying you can't, but still, if you're going to compare muscle activation relative to like a bench press, you need to add weight to that. So if, for example, if you're traveling, you just throw a band in your bag, wrap that around you like the infographic I showed, and you're doing bench press, that is going to activate your muscles just as much, if not more, depending on the overload, than a normal bench press would. So go ahead, quick take-home messages. A wider grip bench, lower pecs, more of a shoulder width apart, maybe a little wider upper pecs. You optimize the angle on incline bench when you're talking about like anywhere from 30 to 50 degrees, but like Will said, just 40 degrees. Decline bench, probably about -20, is going to optimize your lower chest. Machines and flies can work just as good on your chest as bench. So can push-ups, but you've got to hit it within that range. And finally, the chest about 60% fast twitch, 40% slow twitch. So we're really talking about 60% of the time really staying 6 to 12 reps if you're bodybuilding. And then 40% of the time probably you're going higher, 12 to and above. Maybe even a 20 rep burnout, maybe giant sets. So that's kind of a overview of what I say. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. If you guys are just getting on, share this with your friends. Spread the love. And thanks again for this week. We'll go ahead and take your questions.
You can bring that there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what is the best supplement to keep insulin sensitivity optimal during a bulking phase?
The best supplement to keep insulin sensitivity optimal during a bulking phase?
Yes, sir.
Berberine is going to be excellent for that. Probably like 0.5 grams 3 times a day before meals. Berberine is going to be excellent. Like I said, 0.5 grams like 3 times a day. If you take like 1.5 at once, you're going to hurt your stomach. But that seems to be very helpful for improving insulin sensitivity. What about reverse grip bench? Is it true that it activates 85% more upper chest fibers? Will actually covered this yesterday. You want to cover this again, Will? So the question is, reverse grip bench. What's it do? So Will's our neurophys mechanics expert, so I'm going to let him take this question.
What's going on, guys? So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. The answer being yes. Reverse grip bench does activate the clavicular portion of pec major to quite an extent. The downside to that being when you externally rotate and then go back like that, there's a lot of shoulder flexion basically. Well, basically when you come up, there's a lot of shoulder flexion, this kind of motion, right? So that's where you're gonna hit the clavicular head more. Problem being is when you supinate like that, the shoulders become compromised. So you're not able to lift at as high an intensity as you normally would on an incline with a pronated grip. So if you're looking for strength gains and you're trying to lift with maximal intensity, and intensity we're talking about overall load, then it might not be the best way to go about things. However, if you're looking for hypertrophy, then if you lower the load and follow the size principle, so basically work in a higher rep range, then it could be beneficial for clavicular head hypertrophy. So you can use it, it just depends what your goals are.
Nice. Key point that William Wallace is saying is that like if you're not gonna be able to lift as heavy, so it's more of a higher repetition type of thing. So probably like the other 40% of the time you're training, it's probably the days you're gonna use that reverse bench because again you can't lift as heavy. So in terms of tempo, what's the best time frame for the eccentric movement? Mike Dodds, good question. So here's the thing to kind of understand, right? They've compared studies where they've done like slow versus faster eccentric, and the faster leads to like more muscle growth, more muscle damage, greater strength gains, and your volume's higher. Now, I want to point something out. I don't want people to take this to mean that, you know, you're doing boom, 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 right? That's, you understand what I'm saying? You see the guy in the gym, they're like bench pressing, they're just like bouncing off their chest. Like, don't like quote and go, oh, Wilson said I could bounce it off my chest. That's not what I'm saying. Select a tempo that you can control the weight and that you can develop a good mind-muscle connection on. So if you've been benching a long time, that might be like this. Boom, boom, right? But then you go, well, isn't time under tension important? Well, think about this. If I'm doing 5 reps slow or 10 reps a little faster, the total time under tension for those 10 reps on the eccentric load is probably the same as it was for the 5 reps. But I'm actually overloading the individual muscle fibers more on the faster than I am the slower for a lot of complex mechanisms. So as long as you can control the weight and have a mind-muscle connection, that's the tempo you should select. If you're not as well trained, you're not as good with the bench, it might be slower. Once you learn, you'll get faster. Can you do some research in insulin sensitivity post-workout and how to use it to your advantage? I mean, I think that you become more insulin sensitive after you train, depending on what you train. So if you cause a lot of muscle damage, you can actually be more insulin resistant. And so like a lot of times people will eat, like they'll go on Thanksgiving and like, oh, I'm gonna like destroy my muscles. I'm gonna do 50 million sets, and then I'm gonna eat whatever I want. But you actually become kind of insulin resistant at that point. So more concentric loading, like Wingate sprinting on a cycle ergometer where you don't cause a lot of damage. High insulin sensitive, you can take in more carbs. High muscle damage, you actually might be more careful with your carbs that day. What about internal rotation in the short range, external rotation in the long on flies?
Talking about externally down here.
I'm not sure, not positive on like the exact question.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah.
The question is.
Okay. So more volume, less frequency, or more frequency, less volume for hypertrophy? Both. I mean, to be quite honest, like, I'll be honest with you, you will adapt to anything. Like if I'm used to doing 18 sets, and I'm not getting anything out of that, and I go 6 sets Monday, 6 sets Wednesday, 6 sets Friday, eventually I'm gonna adapt to that. I'll get more gains at first, but I'll adapt to that. So then say that I took that and instead of did 6 sets Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I moved it to like 9 sets on, or I moved back and hit like 12 sets one day, and then 6 sets another day. That 12 sets is actually going to be a novel stimulus because I'm not used to it. So our lab that's one of the things we're looking into is periodizing frequency, but that's why I say both. But in general, we do know from most studies that like training to a point more than once a week is probably ideal. You know what I mean? Like I would hit at least everything twice a week probably, especially if you're more advanced. But as far as like when you say high frequency, 4 days a week, 5 days a week each body part, low volume, you're going to adapt to that to where you can move down to 2 days a week, more higher volume. So, are there any questions from Periscope you want to hit me with?
Who was that? LOL13. Repeat that question, please.
Well, why is your opinion? We can hit something here.
That's a good one. How would you program your chest training for hypertrophy training 3 days a week?
Well, because this question later, the best type of periodization for max hypertrophy. So let's say that again, Andy.
How would you periodize your training for hypertrophy if you're training chest 3 days a week?
Oh, okay, same question. All right, cool. Okay, so that's a really good question. Just as my thoughts, and we'll see. We'll let Will chime in here for a second too. My thoughts on like hypertrophy is that variation is key. So you could, based on the chest anatomy and stuff like that, you might have like a basic day where you might be hitting 6 to 8 repetitions, hitting a lot of the fast twitch muscle fibers. One day, you might do something that's a little bit higher rep, maybe like 12 to 20 repetitions. And one day maybe you're kind of in between, like 8 to 12 repetitions. So that's one thing, but notice all I did was just talk about varying the repetitions. You can also vary the exercise itself. What are your thoughts?
I would say that I agree with that. I think that I would agree with what Doc's saying. What I would do though is I would be careful with definitely very firm believer that high intensity training, and again intensity we're talking about overall load, is needed. So working in the lower rep ranges, at the same time you have to be able to hit type 1 fibers can grow, and then those intermediate fibers can grow as well. So you have to hit all rep ranges. What you really want to be careful about is going too high intensity and having too high a volume. When you do that, then you really limit the ability to grow as volume just kind of increases, and then you have nowhere to go from there. Especially if you're training chest 3 times a week, then recovery can be hampered between sessions. So you definitely want to make sure that if your frequency is high, that you need to be careful with your volume, and that volume probably should be tracked, and probably the most important variable to play around with. So if you're working in the 3 to 5 rep range for high intensity, just make sure that you control for sets and that you're not going over in volume, so that maybe the next time you hit chest and you're working in the 8 to 12 range, you don't have a ridiculous amount of sets, so volume just keeps adding up and up. Eventually you're going to see a decrement in performance, and that's just going to show those are just signs of overtraining, and you don't grow. You don't grow when you're overtrained. Performance only suffers.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about the other day. Is like we want to train like crazy, and I think it's great, but you also got to fill your body out too, and that's very, very important.
How about training chest, shoulders, triceps in the same session?
Keisha said we explained that very well. I think she's talking to you, Will.
Thank you, Keisha.
Thanks, Keisha. So what was the question?
Chest, shoulders, triceps in the same session. Is that all right?
Chest, shoulders, triceps in the same session. Is that all right? Yeah, because you do your chest, you're going to fatigue your shoulders, and so you can hit them after, and then you do your chest and shoulders, you're fatigue your triceps, you can finish them off. Again, going on periodization, like if you're going to start off fresh on your triceps, that could be a really good thing, if they're lagging behind. But I think, again, periodizing things and switching things up, because you might be too tired to train your delts after you train your chest. So just think about that. So if they stop growing, separate it out to another day. Cool. All right. Next, let's see. Stephanie LeBlanc. Stefan LeBlanc, sorry. So is cell swelling still good for chest gains, even if the optimal rep range, and we'll take about 2 more questions after this. So is cell swelling still good for chest gains, even if the optimal rep range is lower for reps with higher loads? Basically, which I think what you're saying is that the optimal rep range is lower reps, higher loads for chest. Is cell swelling still important?
What about cell swelling?
I think he's just saying it's
cell swelling, you want to go higher rep range.
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
How does that contribute to it?
Yeah, how does that contribute? I mean, if cell swelling is important for hypertrophy, then remember what we said too. We said that, like, you're 60% fast twitch, but the other 40% of the time, we still said you're throwing in those higher repetition ranges and supersets and giant sets. That's going to get the cell swelling effect. I don't know that anyone has determined what's the greatest contributing factor to hypertrophy. There's controversy over the importance of cell swelling, but I still say explain this to me. Like how, think about like when you're doing like blood flow restriction and you're walking. You have no mechanical stress, right? You have no metabolic stress, and yet you're getting hypertrophy. You have swelling. So, I'm just saying there's a lot of things like that, and then we'll explain this to me, like when you have someone who's like bed rested and you prevent atrophy by wrapping. What's the mechanism? Well, you're getting swelling. It's not mechanical tension. It's not metabolic stress. So I don't know, but I would say that basically if that is a mechanism, I'm saying that other 40% is going to cover that. Anything on there you want me to cover? Or just keep it
Is
going?
flat bench necessary for growth?
No. Flat bench is not necessary for growth. Doc, what is the best method to maximize cell swelling in the pecs in any given hypertrophy session? I'm going to go with, like, basically you're going to talk about like more supersets, giant sets, strip sets, anything that keeps tension on a long time. Like, for example, intraset stretching. We've actually shown in our lab. We haven't published it yet. We gathered the data a long time ago. We saw huge swelling with intraset stretching. Anything that maintains tension is going to maximize swelling.
Flexing between sets.
Flexing, intraset flexing. Yeah. Intraset flexing, right? So flexing between sets. We're actually, we still got to do that study. But
it's a way of occlusion.
it's a way of occlusion. It's a way of occlusion. Like, and that's what most people don't understand. Like, I've been attacked before and go, oh my God, you should never occlude. Like, okay, well then don't ever lift past like 30, 40% of your 1RM, right? So, so you get the point. Let's see. Jason Dames, I was curious about your thoughts on carb backloading if you train in the morning. I'll take one more question after this, Jason. It depends on your goals, right? So there is research that, like, if you train in a low carb depleted state, it could be good for mitochondria and fat loss, in which case I think carb backloading could be really good. When we're talking about glycogen replenishment and things of that nature, depends on how frequently you're training. If you're going to train chest in the morning, chest at night, or you're training a body part every day, maybe having carbs around the workout's important. If you're training the chest twice a week, go ahead and carb backload. It might be good for body comp. Anything you want me to answer? Okay. Can you train strength and hypertrophy in the same session? Mike Dale. Brilliant question, Mike. So Mike Dale asked, can you train strength and hypertrophy in the same session? Tell you a quick story, and that'll be the last thing we do for today. We have a guy in our lab, John Georges, right? He's really strong guy, smart guy, and he came up to me a few years ago, and he's like, Doc, I want to do a study where I train a hybrid, where I train everything in one session, like strength and hypertrophy in the same session, or separate them out where I have strength days and hypertrophy days. What do you think is going to work better? I said, to be honest, I don't know if there's going to be interference going on. I think separating them out might be better. But it turns out that he's finished 7 subjects in the study. He's actually finishing it off, but based on the 7 subjects he's finished, if that continues to be right, my prediction was wrong. So, and that's the cool thing about science is you might predict one thing and you might be wrong. I was wrong in this case. So basically what he found is that actually training strength and hypertrophy in the same session actually seemed to be better for like hypertrophy and better for strength. So again, that's preliminary data, so we really got to move more on that. But I like extreme stretching, Luke. So, okay, guys, so that is...
YouTube channel up and running.
Guys, YouTube channel up and running. Where can they find us?
The Muscle PhD.
The Muscle PhD. Subscribe. There's a cool intro video that I love. Paul Hauser put that together. Huge shout out to Paul. But anyway, yeah, subscribe to the Muscle PhD YouTube channel. We're going to start putting out some sick, amazing content. And that's actually where we're going to, Andy and I are going to start going to the food science lab and doing food science live from the ASPI. So, guys, thank you so much. Again, last Friday, we hit 100K.
Yep.
This morning, we were at 104K on Instagram. So you guys are spreading the love. Thank you. We love you back. And we really appreciate you. We're going to be doing more of these talks more frequently. And Andy and I got to work on a paper right now. So, on a man. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thank you. Love you. And bye.